Welcome to Writing the Paranormal. Today we have with us two experienced writers, and they are our really complimentary people to the Paranormal Day. We have Mara Purl and we have Rebecca Forster. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we'll get started. Today is National Paranormal Day, and it started in 2013, but fittingly, no one knows who started it. So we're going to get right into what is paranormal? What is the paranormal? So ladies, introduce yourself. Please tell us more about you. And I'll start with Rebecca.
Thanks so much, Patrice and Mara. This is just going to be a ton of fun. I am a USA Today and Amazon bestselling author. I have written over 40 books. Most of them are thrillers. But the book we're going to be talking about today has an uber paranormal aspect to it. So I'm very thrilled to be talking about it. That is kind of it in a nutshell. I've been writing for as long as I can remember.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. Mara, tell us about you and your really illustrious history as a writer.
Oh, well, thank you very, very much, Patrice. And it's really an honor to be here with you and with Rebecca. I'm a best-selling author on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. I have about 20 books out. And I write women's fiction normally, but this was a journey into the paranormal, also my first. And it's been such an interesting journey to write in a new genre for me. And I have learned a great deal from it, and I feel I still am learning from this interesting genre.
Well, thank you, Mara. So why don't one of you just start by saying, what is paranormal?
To me, the word describes it very well. It's the normal, and then there's something extra on top of that, the para part of the word, which to me means that within this genre, you begin to read it, and it seems as though everything is as usual for quite a while, perhaps, in the story. But then some unusual things begin to happen, and your characters take note of it, your readers take note of it. And so you're pulling in perhaps extrasensory perception, or perhaps a shift in the sense of the progression of time that would be normal. So it is an enhanced sense of reality. That's how I think of the genre.
Well, it also is really something that cannot be explained by logic, and it is out of the realm of the normal. Rebecca, from your point of view.
I couldn't agree more with what Mara said. And sometimes people confuse this genre with fantasy. And I think fantasy is more creating another world. You know, you might have the fantasy readers who like Dungeons and Dragons and those kind of things. When we're writing the paranormal, what it's about is the challenge of drawing the reader into a story that seems incredibly normal. For me, it would be this book, which is Before Her Eyes. This is the book I'm talking about today. In Before Her Eyes, it starts off as a normal thriller. You know, we've got an execution in a small town on the Oregon-California border, and we have a woman there had been an attempted kidnapping. And the challenge in writing this is to keep up the thriller aspect so that my regular thriller readers understood that there's a crime to solve, there is an urgency, but then very slowly, and I know Mara does this too, very slowly you have to introduce elements that start the reader thinking, what's really going on here? And I think one of the most exciting things is when you do meet that challenge as a writer and the reader at the very end says, oh my gosh, I never saw the end coming. And yet they can go back and they can trace the little bits, little breadcrumbs you've left. So it absolutely is something out of the normal. It can be a feeling, it can be something that you literally just tweak a little bit. For instance, I have my character running in the forest and she sees a ranger station and the ranger isn't there, but all the things indicate that he is there, but she doesn't see him. And so those things made writing this for me, when I'm used to doing, sort of slam bang thriller writing, made it very challenging and very satisfying actually at the end of this, because it was like, wow, I managed to write a whole book in a genre that is, a little out of my wheelhouse.
Well, that little passage that you talked about. So your character is looking at, was it real or was it just imagination? Now, I want to point to that you really have been writing thrillers throughout your career.
Correct.
And tell us how that switch happened.
Well, I didn't switch. What happened was there was an inspiration that was very, very personal. And while I always write legal or police thrillers, I happened to be in a position where both my dad and my father-in-law were very ill at the same time, and they ended up passing within 3 months of each other. And what happened was that I spent quite a bit of time with them toward the end of their days. And what I noticed was that they were seeing quite a different reality than I was seeing. They had a very lively life and discussions going on with things that I couldn't see, could almost feel how real it was, but this belonged only to them. And hence the idea, before her eyes, they say, your life passes before your eyes at the end of your lifetime. And so it wasn't that I necessarily went to a different genre. It was that the inspiration for this book was so personal and so on my doorstep. There was just nothing to be done but to address it. And I took their sense of their desire to continue to live, no matter, what they had to do to accomplish that. And I took that and translated it into this book.
I see. Well, that's true of many authors of this genre, where something personal happens to them, and that is the inspiration. Now, Mara, What the Soul Suspects. Tell us more about that book.
Again, there are some interesting parallels with Rebecca's experience. So this is the book that I'm speaking about today. And in my case, it was an element in my personal life and also an element from within the story. And these two elements combine to create this story. So I write about a fictional town called Milford Haven, which is on the central coast of California. And it's life in a small town featuring a protagonist who is an artist, and she has followed her heart to this town. And what that means to me is that she has followed her intuition. There is, however, another character, a journalist named Chris Christian, who has not followed her heart, but has suppressed the intuition that has told her several times not to go to this particular meeting. But let's say these two characters represent the head and the heart. So Christine, following her head and saying, oh, I'm a big girl, I can take care of myself, goes to a dangerous meeting and gets shoved down into a hole at an unfinished house. This happens right at the beginning of the first novel in my saga. We don't really know what happened to Christine. So there have been several books since then, and it was time to get back to her, whatever did happen to her. Now, meanwhile, like Rebecca, I was caring for my elders, my parents, during their last days. I was able to take care of them and spent a lot of time with them. And we began to have some unusual experiences. My mother, we had a conversation, I would say maybe just 2 or 3 months before she passed on. And I blurted out, you know, Mom, your life continues. And she said, you think that? And I said, I know that. Well, interestingly, after that, she seemed to be able to push open a door that I think she had wanted to open for much of her life. She said that after that conversation, she began to see and experience conversations with people. I couldn't see the people she was talking to. And she even had a foreshadowing. She said to me one day, oh, the young men came to the door, but I told them it wasn't time yet. Well, on Mom's last birthday, my sister and I had planned something very special for her. And on that day, the young men came to the door and had to carry her upstairs so that she could attend this event on her behalf. So she was already experiencing what I would say is the paranormal. She also had very strong feelings about this character of mine, Christine Christian. And she said, now, Christine doesn't die, you know. No. She must not die. Which is why this book is actually dedicated to my mom. So What the Soul Suspects begins right where we left Christine after this fall. She wakes up from the fall and is trying to figure out what happened to her. Some of what's happening next seems fairly normal. She climbs out and she does normal things like drives her car and goes to her house. But then some things are not quite tracking. And one of the things that goes out of sync for her is time. So where in this life we experience a very linear sense of time that we can count on, and we use calendars and clocks. For Christine, it's Tuesday, but then it's Friday, it's winter, but then it's autumn. She's not quite tracking with time. And that's one of the signals whereby she begins to figure out she isn't where she thought she was. And then again, as Rebecca mentioned, there was a technical challenge in that I didn't want people to know till the end what had happened to her. And so I want the readers to have this experience of being on this journey of discovery with her.
I see. So let's talk about genre. There are several genres of the paranormal. There are two I'll mention: paranormal romance, paranormal fiction, fantasy. So where would you categorize your book, Rebecca?
My book is always going to be a thriller. It just is what I do. And there will always be a murder. So if there is such a thing as paranormal police procedural, which I think we've kind of experienced that sometimes, especially in television, where you'll have a psychic, you'll have someone come in to help solve a crime. That would be, and I don't know what you call it, I guess paranormal police procedural. But I can't say that I fall into the paranormal genre. I can say that I have written a thriller with paranormal aspects. And so the main focus always is on solving the murder and finding the woman in jeopardy. And so finding the woman in jeopardy just has this additional layer to it that it was interesting because some readers absolutely loved it and got it and understood what I was doing and forgave me for it because they were so used to seeing what I normally do, which is pretty much of a procedural aspect all the way through. And there were other people who didn't like me veering off, that course. But the one thing for me was this book just had to be written. And that in and of itself was kind of a paranormal writing experience for me because the book was 15 years in the making. I had the idea, the New York publishers, some liked it, some didn't, nobody wanted to commit. And then I published it on my own. And the funny thing was, it actually won a Reader's Choice from the Paranormal Romance Guild. So I'm not sure we can say we belong one place or another because I know a lot of readers who will read straight thrillers and then they'll veer off into, romantic suspense. I think readers just like a good story, and hopefully that's what they get.
I think you're absolutely right about that. Readers do like a good story. Now, Mara, how would you categorize your genre?
My usual genre is women's fiction. Interestingly, when you look at, let's say, the New York Times bestseller list, there isn't a category called women's fiction. There is a category called romance. Romance, however, as fantastic a genre as it is, has a certain predictability, and women's fiction cannot be counted on to have a romantic ending. So it's a bit of a larger genre. Paranormal, as I mentioned, this was my first foray. And like Rebecca, this book won a couple of awards. It won for paranormal mystery and it won for paranormal romance. So I think it fits into both of those. And also, as what happened to Rebecca, some of my readers were pretty uncomfortable and they were, wait a minute, you can't go into paranormal. I'm counting on you to keep me in a safe, normal world. And so I had to say, don't worry, the main series is continuing. There will be more. And then other readers said, this is great. This is the best thing. Are you doing more of this? So this book will have a prequel and a sequel. So there's going to be at least a little bit more paranormal, in that there really isn't any other way to deal with this character. And I don't know if Rebecca feels this way, but sometimes I feel I'm not the one writing. I'm the one listening and transcribing. But sometimes it's the characters who tell us what they're going to do.
So would you say that there is an art to writing paranormal?
Oh, I would. Oh, definitely. In fact, people who do this on a regular basis, I have the utmost respect for. This was one of the most difficult books I have written. And I've written some that have been intricate, given, if they're a layered court case or something like that, where I've had to do a lot of research. But writing this one was tough because I had put it on 2 tracks. So there was the third person track, which was my straight thriller track. But then there was this first person track with the woman who was so desperate to save her own life. And those had to be dovetailed into each other so that if she heard something in real life, I had to make sure that it was happening in the third person track and it could come into the first person track. And the funny thing was, I loved doing this. It was like a big puzzle. And I was disappointed those who didn't enjoy it. But lately I've been hearing a lot of people like you, Maura, say, are you going to bring these people back? And I thought, maybe I should give this, another shot, because it was totally fun. I loved it. I think it's very difficult, and people who can do this or do fantasy on a regular basis have my respect. They really do.
Well, what's really important for any writer is to really believe the world in which they are writing. Whether it is fantasy or whether it's romance, the same holds true for paranormal. Now, Mara, you were talking about your character. Now, is that character one that has a thread in all of your books? Is this one that you've just created?
These novels actually started way back, or in an earlier iteration. I created a radio drama called Milford Haven, USA, which became a hit on BBC Radio. And Christine was indeed one of those early characters. So she's always been part of the story. But once I started the novels, she gets into trouble immediately. And she was always important thematically. She was always important as the representation of logic only. But now she's a journalist, and I, at one time in my career, was a journalist. Actually, my husband's been after me for years to write something more about my experiences as a journalist. So these are becoming Christine's backstory. So I am writing shorter books that happened much earlier in her career. So I've been, living with this character for a long time. I think part of the difficulty of this writing journey was I really had to ask myself, what do I believe spiritually? I couldn't be inauthentic about this. I couldn't make up, let's say, a ghost. It really wasn't like that at all. It is where the tree falls, there it lies. So where we end in this mortal experience, I believe, is where we pick up. So there isn't a free ride. The problems we have solved in this lifetime remain solved. Those that we haven't solved, we still have that work ahead of us. So I really do believe life continues. And only because of that was I able to write this. And I think writing this book actually solidified that sense of faith and understanding of the spiritual journey for me. I hope I'm not proselytizing in this book at all. It's a proposed journey. If it's interesting and helpful and engaging for my readers, that's what I hope. And I certainly hope, if nothing else, it is a good story. But I also think underneath all that, I'm kind of asking my readers, well, what do you think happens?
Well, I'm sure since you have so many followers and book clubs that love your books, they will absolutely let you know what they
will
sooner rather than later. I in researching this event here today on paranormal, I read something about Stephen King, and one of my favorite book and film is The Shining.
Oh.
And when Stephen King was writing this book, it actually came to him in a dream. The whole story came to him in a dream of the character running in a hallway. And, you talk about the location, it is actually set in Colorado, but the real location is in Mount Hood. And I've actually been in that hotel called the Timberline Lodge, and it is very paranormal when you walk in the door. So I guess everyone draws from their own experience, maybe dreams and others. So Rebecca, tell us more about your next thriller or paranormal novel.
Well, I've actually been toying with the idea of bringing back these characters. The sheriff in this very small town is called Dove Conley, and he's a Native American with sort of a second sight. And that's why this whole thing really worked. He had, his senses are so finely attuned that he thought he could find this woman. So it was a race against, can he find her before she dies? Can she save herself before she dies? I'm not telling you if either one of those happened. But people did respond to Dove Conley really well with the idea that he is fairly isolated in this small town. And the reason, so it's interesting you talked about what we're inspired by. So many things came together with this book in terms of inspiration. First, it was my parents and their journey. But it was also, I had been, one of my favorite places is a place called Jerome, Arizona, and it's just above Sedona. And Sedona is very spiritual. It just is. And I love, the minute I cross the border into Sedona, I feel something. I don't know what it is, but it is a calmness and a peacefulness that I don't want to leave even when my time is up. But Jerome is a mining town above Sedona, and it's very old, and the buildings are very old. And there was a strange hospital there, and there is a high school that is deserted. And I happened to meet and get to know the small town sheriff there, and it's just him. And he started telling me all about the challenges of being law enforcement in a place that's really kind of wild and woolly. And so that's who I based, it's Sheriff Mumma. I based my character Dove Conley on him, and I'd like to see him proceed. The trick is, and I have a couple of other series. So I have the Witness series, which is a saga-like legal thriller series. And that's been very, very popular. I have a police procedural series that's episodic. But this one, because I want to always have that same otherworldly feel about it, I have to figure out what's going to be in his forest. And so these books aren't going to be written as quickly as the other ones. But I do have a new idea for Dove Conley, and someone that he can mentally and spiritually connect with, once a crime is committed. So I'm kind of hoping to pursue Before Her Eyes and keep those characters and try one more time. I really enjoyed writing it that much. But right now I'm working on, I have a new release coming out that is Intimate Relations. And that was inspired by the fact that Google Alphabet, I received a call one day from a reporter asking me how I felt about my book being used in the Alphabet Brain Project. And I had no idea my book was being used in such a way. And that started another road of inspiration about AI and tech and the marginalization of human beings. So maybe I am moving a little bit into paranormal and, techno worlds and things like that, just to veer off the general thriller course now and again.
Well, you talked about Sedona, that feeling, or the vortex. It's the vortexes that are there, and everyone speaks of them, and I've been there myself. So really with the paranormal, the implausible needs to be plausible. That's really one of the things that
exactly
is the tabula rasa of writing the paranormal. Now, Mara, let's go back to your characters. And I think a lot of our listeners are very interested in what tips you may have to writing the paranormal.
I'd love to just delve for a moment into my characters. I think one of the issues of having a character who is on a paranormal trajectory is, how can she be heard and understood in the normal world? So the investigator who has been looking for her as a missing person, there hasn't been a body, but he has a sense that something's wrong. He's been diligently looking for her. And what he comes up against is his own, let's say, paranormal talent, something that he had suppressed and denied. He had a grandmother who had what the family called the gift, and she warned him that he might start to experience it as he got older. So he is starting to experience lucid dreams, and he isn't aware at the time that he's in a dream. Instead, he's having what he thinks is a completely normal conversation with Christine. When he wakes up, he's disoriented and startled, and he has to make sense of all this. So he happens to be an African-American man in the sheriff's department in the Central Coast in the late 90s, at a time when there were very few African-American citizens in that whole area, let alone in law enforcement. So he's already living a bit as a fish out of water. And this, he's working so hard to feel at home and normal. And this is pulling him in the opposite direction, another reason he's resisting it. One person whom he trusts, who helps him with this, is a Native American Chumash elder who is quite familiar with and has this capacity herself. So there's a very unusual scene where, is it 4 people who are in the room, or is it 3 people who are in the room, or is it 2 people who are in the room? And so it was challenging to write that and to make sure that from each POV, I'm seeing correctly what that character would see. So you asked about tips. I think that authenticity, that listening to your inner voice, paying close attention to experiences that others have had, whether through interviewing them or whether they're in your own family. These experiences can be very, very rich. And so I think we honor them by bringing them into our stories.
I see. Well, that is what we were talking about earlier. Is it real or is it imagined? So I'm going to go into our chat, and Monique from Chicago has a question, and either of you can answer it. Monique says, I am a novice writer. I somehow lack confidence. And she wants to know, how does she get started writing in the paranormal field?
Well, I'll take it. I want to say hi, first of all. And secondly, I want to tell you, the lack of confidence sometimes never goes away. I think every time I start a new book, I think, oh my gosh, I'm looking at, blank now computer screen, but it used to be a blank page. And there is that moment where you think, what makes me think I can do this? Well, here's the trick. Why not you? Why not any of us? Writers don't, start writing when they're 5. They write when they've had life experience and they have something to say and they have something to share. And when you begin to write your story. Don't be worried who's going to see it down the road. Don't be worried that you might be rejected. Be worried about, is this the story you want to tell? In fact, I take that back. Don't be worried about anything. You sit down and you start to type or write in longhand or however it feels good to you. Speak into your computer, whatever works. But the thing is, just remember, why not you? I was 36, I think, when I published my first book. I'd never written anything before that. And I thought, this is amazing. Somebody actually wants to read this thing. It was fun. It was a lark. I was having a great time. If you can channel some of that, and realize that your imagination is probably richer than, half the people in the world, you'll feel so much better about it. This is supposed to be fun. This is supposed to be a stretch for your soul. So go ahead and do it and enjoy yourself. And when it gets serious, after you've done a few drafts or something, then seek somebody out to give you advice, someone you trust, not your mother. Your mother will always tell you it's great. So please don't do that. But one voice you trust. And it sounds like you're really serious about this. So I can't wait to see what you come up with.
This is a question from Mara, and this is from George. And George says, I live in Hollywood. and I make documentaries. I'm thinking of veering into the paranormal, and I know that you work in the film world. Can you please give me some direction on how I switch from documentaries, which are real, to paranormal?
What an interesting question. Well, first, I agree with everything that Rebecca said. So no matter what kind of story you're writing, the thing is to sit down and let that story start to come through. I think spending a certain amount of time, maybe it's the quiet time before you have to go to work and do other things, spend that time listening and writing down the ideas that come to you. And as all of us have been saying today, whether you're working in nonfiction or fiction, you still are starting with yourself, your personal experience, and that authentic sense of what it is that strikes you, what it is that interests you. So if you have experience in documentaries, I imagine you've already noticed some unusual things that just happen. And where do we normally categorize those? I think my character, Christine, has been dismissive of those things. Well, there was synchronicity, but so what? Well, I had a funny feeling that I ought to make a certain phone call, but so what? Well, what would happen if we started to pay attention to those experiences? Maybe that's the guidance that's trying to come through that would make your story all the more vibrant because of its reality.
Thank you, Mara. We have another question from Barbara, who is actually in Austin, Texas. Barbara says her favorite programs are Early Twilight Zone, X-Files, and Paranormal Activity. How can I, as a writer, match up to such classics? Either one of you.
I wish we could. I wish we could. I think the most successful creative work comes when you give yourself over to your story. One of my first books, Hostile Witness, I thought was a one-off story, and people embraced these characters, and it's now an 8-book series, and it's been optioned, and I mean, all sorts of weird things. But it was because I never thought of what it was going to be. I thought of what I wanted it to be. So, boy, if I had to think about Twilight Zone, I'd be paralyzed. I'd never do anything. I don't know about you guys, but Barbara, I think you be inspired by that and work toward that wonderful goal. But just do your own work, and you never know. You could be the next Serling. Wouldn't that be cool? But otherwise, we're crushed, don't you think, by trying to hold ourselves to a standard of classics?
Very good question. One more we have before we wrap up. This is from Hopi, and believe it or not, from Arizona, Sedona, saying, I am surrounded by paranormal feelings because of the vortex, and I'd like to know, how do I harness these feelings that I'm having and get them down on paper? Mara, why don't you answer this one?
I have also spent a little time in Sedona, and it is a very almost magical place. I want to share, though, an experience that I had at Chaco Canyon. Chaco is an ancient place, and it has hieroglyphics. And the guide who took us to see these asked us to shift from a sense of words to a sense of pictures. And this is funny, but she held up a restroom sign. So it had a female figure and a male figure with a line in between. And she said, what do you think this might mean 1,000 years from now? And all of us agreed. It seemed to say maybe men and women couldn't talk to each other, or we weren't sure. So with that mindset adjusted, she then began to show us these extraordinary drawings. And one cluster of drawings seemed to focus on exploration of the universe and education. There were drawings of galaxies and constellations, and there was mathematics. Then there was another cluster that seemed to focus on trade and commerce and business. So being there and just going into that listening space, it seemed like I could come up with 100 stories. So I think being in Sedona, you can listen, watch, and I would say notice what makes you curious. I think sometimes that's the little chink in the wall that the light comes through. If you find yourself wondering about something, I think that could be the beginning of your story.
Thank you, Mara. Well, Rebecca, Mara, thank you so much for Wordeee University's Writing the Paranormal, and we look forward to having you back again.